In the first chapter of 2 Corinthians, Paul says, "Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God. For just as we share abundantly in the sufferings of Christ, so also our comfort abounds through Christ." So moms, let's be honest. Life is painful, and life with disabilities often hurts even more. It just goes with the territory. We feel the deep heaviness of all the responsibilities that we carry. We worry over finances and how to provide for all of the needs that our family faces. And we weep when we see our children suffer or be rejected. And then to add on top of that, therapies, hospital stays, long dark nights sitting up with the sick little one, or trying to manage behaviors. And I'm sure that you have your own unique list of things that hurt you as well. Our hearts often ache from the loneliness and from the heartbreak that comes when family members and friends seem to abandon us because they can't grasp or comprehend our lives. And sometimes our response to the hurt and pain that we experience is to want to run away from God. Out of anger, out of frustration, out of hurt, we distance ourselves from Him. All the why questions start to creep in, and doubting God is not far behind. So our big question for this week is, will I trust God even when life hurts? Will we trust God when we are suffering or when we watch our kids suffer? Will we trust Him with our grief and our pain? Will we trust that God is with us even if we feel abandoned by everyone else? When we are scared, when we feel like our lives are out of control, when situations are so incredibly painful, this is when we must be anchored to God and the truth of His love for us. We must remind ourselves that we are being held by the most powerful being in the universe, who is made of nothing but love. We must know it to be true and anchor ourselves to that truth. Now, I know you may be thinking, well, how in the world do we trust God when we see our children suffering or when we see all of the tragedies around the world? How can we trust God when our lives are so brutally painful? Well, Paul says that God is the Father of all compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all of our troubles. Do you see Him that way? Do you see God that way? Do you turn to Him for comfort when you are suffering, or do you turn and run away from Him? When fear is looming and life is so painful, we must remind ourselves of the truth by shifting our focus off of what we are facing and focusing our minds on God and His faithfulness. And one of the best ways to do that is through gratitude and choosing to have a thankful heart, even in the midst of the painful things that we face each day. Gratitude during times of hardship and suffering requires surrender, surrendering our pain, our hurt, and our losses to God, and then turning our heart to Him. And in that surrender, we can make the choice to be grateful and receive the comfort meant for us. To find and receive the comfort of God that Paul is talking about, we must enter into God's presence. And Psalm 100 gives us the exact GPS directions on how to get into this glorious presence. It says, enter His gates with thanksgiving and His courts with praise. In 1967, at the age of 17, Johnny Erickson Tata became a quadriplegic in a diving accident. Her life was forever changed on that day, and she has spent every day since in a wheelchair, and she needs help all throughout her day. But she didn't allow this tragic accident to stop her from loving and serving others. In 1979, she founded Johnny and Friends to provide hope and encouragement for families living with disabilities all around the world through their family retreats, their church training, and so many other resources and programs to support special needs families. Now, her life since her accident in 1967 has been challenging and incredibly painful in so many ways. Recently, I watched an Instagram reel featuring Johnny that so encouraged me. Johnny lives with so much physical pain in her life, and in this video, she shared that she had been struggling with level 8 pain that was unrelenting. And I can't even imagine how challenging that must be to live daily with that much physical pain.
A few weeks ago, I was struggling with level 8 pain. It was unrelenting. And I confessed to a friend that I really had to climb my way up out of depression. And she said to me, "Come on, you're Johnny. You don't get that depressed." Well, I do. I mean, I have to fight. I've got to fight for my joy and my spiritual sanity. And the best way I fight off the blues is to give thanks for everything. I make my heart be grateful. I stir my spirit toward gratitude. I stoke my thankfulness. God tells me to do it in 1 Thessalonians. So whether I feel like it or not, I compose a list of blessings and I recite them out loud. And I encourage you to do the same. When you feel depression creeping in, occupy your heart with a list of blessings before it gets filled up with morbid thoughts. Mouth your thankfulness. Your heart will catch up and your spirit will come into alignment. It's a great way to fight for your joy.
I have found this to be the case in my life as well. When my life feels unbearable, when my son is suffering through yet another seizure, if I can turn my focus to gratitude, if I can find something to be thankful to God for, even in the pain, peace comes into my heart and the healing comes. That is why we at Rising Above are such big believers in the power of gratitude, and why each one of your sessions in this series starts with giving you an opportunity to share what you are thankful for. Moms, we have so many difficult things in our lives and so many things that take place each and every day that threaten to steal our peace and our joy. But we are told in 1 Thessalonians 5:16-18 to rejoice always, pray continually, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. Notice that verse 18 doesn't say to give thanks for all circumstances, but in all circumstances. Now, when my son had a week-long hospital stay a few years ago, I was not thankful that he was sick. But I was grateful for the great care that he received, and I was thankful for every kind nurse that God assigned to us. And for Sweet Rose, who was the custodian who came in to clean his room each morning and was the bright spot in our day. Not only was I thankful to God for those things, but I made sure to thank those people as well, to let them know how grateful that we were for them. I made a conscious decision that even in the hard, even during those long, sleepless nights, that I would turn my heart towards God through gratitude. It truly made a difference in our experience that week. And I do say our experience because as John Alex's mom, I set the tone for how we respond to challenges and hardships. If I'm upset and I'm complaining, it is going to impact him. But if I choose to trust God, if I turn my heart towards him through gratitude, my son feels it as well, as do all of the people that we are interacting with. Another way that we turn our hearts to God when life hurts is through worship. Now that might be putting on worship music and blaring it through your house or in your car because it changes the atmosphere and it changes your heart. But for me, worship often comes in the form of me reminding myself of who God is and proclaiming it out loud. And I do this not because God's an egomaniac and he needs to hear it from me. It's for me. It turns my heart to the truth of who God is. And when I do that, my faith in him increases and peace comes into my heart and into my mind. When life hurts, when we are scared or weary, it helps when we call to mind who God is and when we remember his faithfulness. Often in my journaling, I will pour out my heart to God about how painful a situation is and how I feel in the midst of it. You know, it's important to do so. Our losses and pain matter to us, and they matter to God. But then I flip it and I remind myself of what I know to be true. True about the situation and true about God. And we see this pattern all throughout the Psalms. Another beautiful example is found in Lamentations 3. And these are the words of the prophet Jeremiah. I remember my affliction and my wandering, the bitterness and the gall. I remember them, and my soul is downcast within me. Yet this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. I say to myself, the Lord is my portion. Therefore, I will wait for him. Now, did you notice what Jeremiah said? After he laments and pours out his sorrow, he says, this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. In the midst of his sorrow, he reminded himself of the truths he knew about God, and it renewed his hope. Now, my friend Sandy Ramsey Travick has such a beautiful story of how God revealed himself to her through a time of worship during a season of suffering and pain for her family. Listen to her words and be encouraged.
My son, who's 24, has multiple disabilities that all trace back to meningitis contracted as a toddler. In addition to cognitive disabilities, the illness has also caused kidney failure, cerebral palsy, hydrocephalus, and seizure disorder. Early on, with all of Miles' medical conditions, worship became my go-to response in tough situations. It has since become a lifestyle. During the pandemic, Miles suffered a number of worsening health challenges. He began having more difficult and dangerous seizures. The kidney he'd received in a transplant 17 years prior was no longer working effectively. As a result, Miles was becoming weaker and sicker as toxins built up in his body. He had to be admitted to the hospital to begin hemodialysis as he awaited a kidney for his second transplant. I was starting to feel overwhelmed as I watched my child suffer. When I was able to get some alone time with God, I immediately went into worship. As I lifted my hands, the Lord asked, "Do you trust me?" And I burst into tears. I replied, "Yes, Lord, I trust you, but I'm scared to death. I don't know where this process will lead and what it might cost Miles." But the Lord didn't rebuke me because of my fear. Instead, he promised me, "I'm fighting for Miles. You can remain calm." And everything changed after that. During that time in worship, the Lord allowed me to release my pain and my fear. Then he assured me that he was with me and he was with Miles and he was for Miles. And because of that, I trusted that Miles would be okay. And that's exactly what my soul needed.
Moms, let's decide today to be women who choose to worship God through our pain, who seek God for comfort, who choose to believe that God is with us on those long, dark nights. And let us say with confidence, even if my story includes pain and my life hurts at times, I will trust God.